Seems like you're pretty ready to get into this whole world of agile project management.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe even, unlock some serious productivity gains.
Mhm.
I mean, teams are shaving off like 10 to 12 hours a week using this framework.
Wow.
Imagine having like an extra day back every week.
Right. And what's really interesting is we're seeing it pop up everywhere. Like it started in software development, obviously.
Right.
But we're seeing it now in marketing, education, even research labs.
Yeah.
It's clearly more than just a tech industry buzzword at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so it's spreading like wildfire.
Uh-huh.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, it almost seems too good to be true.
Yeah, I think that's where the distinction between agile as a philosophy comes in.
Okay.
And Scrum as a practical framework for actually like implementing that philosophy. So agile is all about, iterative progress, collaborating closely with your customer, whoever that is for the project. Could be internal, external, whatever.
Right.
But Scrum gives you those concrete steps, the roles, the meetings. It's like the how-to guide to actually living and breathing that agile mindset.
So agile is the destination and Scrum is the roadmap.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that.
Okay.
You don't even have to be like a tech whiz to benefit from this. That it can help in any field where teamwork and deadlines exist.
Oh, yeah.
Is that realistic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to think about it, anytime you've got a team working towards a goal, right? There are going to be roadblocks, changing priorities, maybe even that dreaded scope creep. And Scrum just gives you that structure for handling that chaos in a way that keeps everyone on the same page and focused on delivering value quickly.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my interest. So let's get into the nitty-gritty.
All right.
Walk me through how a typical Scrum project actually unfolds.
Okay, so picture this. You break your project down into these short bursts called sprints, usually 1 to 4 weeks long. During each sprint, the team is laser focused on just delivering a usable piece of the final product. Now, to make that happen smoothly, there's 3 key roles.
Yeah. The articles mention this like Scrum Trinity or something, like the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's start with that product owner. It sounds like they're kind of calling the shots.
Not necessarily calling the shots. They're more the voice of the customer. They own the product backlog, which is essentially just a prioritized wish list of all the features and requirements. And a misconception is that they're this like dictator just like throwing down commands. But they're actually constantly collaborating with the team, refining the backlog based on feedback and new information that comes up.
So it's more about guiding the ship than barking orders.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and then we have the Scrum Master.
Right.
They sound kind of like the enforcer, making sure everyone's following the rules.
Again, not quite. They're more like a coach, facilitator, protector, all rolled into one. They make sure the team understands Scrum, helps them remove roadblocks, shields them from distractions.
Right.
And a misconception is they're like project managers, when really they're focused on the process, not the day-to-day tasks.
Okay. And finally, the folks doing the heavy lifting, the development team.
The development team, exactly. And this is where the self-organizing magic happens, They decide how to best tackle the work, collaborate closely to meet those sprint goals.
Yeah.
And one myth is that it's only for software developers.
Yeah.
But you could have marketers, researchers, teachers, you name it, all working together as a development team using these principles.
So we've got our rules defined, but how does the work actually get done within those sprints? The articles mentioned these ceremonies.
Events is the preferred term.
Events, okay.
Less mystical, more practical.
Yeah. Got it.
So you have 4 key events that keep the Scrum engine running. First up is sprint planning.
Okay.
This is where the team chooses items from that prioritized product backlog and creates their own sprint backlog, which is basically their plan of attack for the next, couple of weeks.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I'm guessing there are regular check-ins to keep everyone on track.
You got it. Daily stand-ups, quick 15-minute meetings where the team just shares progress, flags any roadblocks, plans the day's work. No long-winded status reports, just focused communication. Now, one thing people get wrong is they think this is for the manager to micromanage, but it's actually run by the team for the team.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've planned, we're working, eventually that sprint comes to an end. What happens then?
Time for a sprint review.
Yeah.
The team demos what they've built, get feedback from stakeholders, and again, the customer can be internal too, right? This ensures they're on the right track and helps refine that product backlog further.
So it's a good a good chance to course correct
Yeah.
before things go too far off the rails.
Exactly.
But what about reflecting on, like, the process itself?
That's where that final event comes in the sprint retrospective.
Okay.
The team gathers, discusses what went well, what could be improved, and identifies those actionable steps for the next sprint. It's about constantly fine-tuning their approach.
Right.
And a misconception is that it's about pointing fingers, but it's actually a blameless space for just honest reflection and continuous improvement.
So it's like a built-in lessons learned
Exactly. Yeah.
at the end of every sprint.
And that's what gives Scrum its adaptability and effectiveness, this constant cycle of planning, working, reviewing, and reflecting.
Sounds pretty efficient.
It can be, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered, like, the basics of Scrum, right? Roles, events, the whole shebang.
Right.
But let's get real for a second.
Yeah.
The articles also mention some potential pitfalls. Uh-huh.
Like Scrum actually leading to more chaos
Right.
if it's not implemented properly, which seems kind of ironic for a framework that's, designed to bring order.
It's true, yeah. It's not a magic bullet. One article I read even compared it to learning a new language.
Okay.
You can't just memorize a few phrases and expect to be fluent. It takes time and practice and a real commitment from the whole team to actually master it.
So what are some of the common mistakes that teams make that lead to these, Scrum train wrecks?
Yeah. So a big one is neglecting the importance of buy-in from everyone involved, right? If even one person is kind of dragging your feet or clinging to the old ways of working, it can throw that whole process off track.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like trying to play a team sport where half the players are refusing to follow the rules of the game.
Exactly, yeah. Another common pitfall is setting unrealistic expectations.
Scrum can lead to, incredible productivity boosts, but it's not an instant fix. One study I saw here showed it took teams an average of 6 months to really hit their stride.
So patience is key.
Patience is key, yes.
But what about the opposite problem? Like, what if a team gets so caught up in following the Scrum rules that they kind of lose sight of the actual project goals?
Yeah, that's the Scrum Butt syndrome,
Or
right?
Scrum Butt, okay.
You hear teams saying, we're doing Scrum BUT, and then they proceed to undermine the very principles that make it effective,
Yeah.
It's like trying to bake a cake, but refusing to use flour.
So it's all about finding that balance, sticking to the framework, but also being willing to adapt it to fit your specific needs and context.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of context, the articles mentions Scrum being used in all sorts of different industries these days. Any particularly inspiring examples that come to mind?
Oh, absolutely. So there's this fascinating case study about a hospital that used Scrum to revamp their patient intake process. They were struggling with long wait times, frustrated patients.
Right.
But by applying Scrum principles, they managed to cut wait times by like 40%.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So Scrum can actually have a tangible impact on people's lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just boosting a company's bottom line.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just healthcare. There's this other article about a financial institution that was using Scrum to develop a new mobile banking app.
Okay.
And they were able to get customer feedback early and often,
Right.
leading to a much more user-friendly product.
That's a great example of how Scrum can foster a more customer-centric approach.
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm guessing that early feedback loop also helps prevent those, costly reworks down the line.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all about failing fast, learning from those failures, and just constantly iterating towards a better solution.
And speaking of learning, there's this article about a university that used Scrum to revamp their entire curriculum development process.
Wow.
Like, they broke down silos between departments, created a much more collaborative environment.
Amazing.
Oh, it really does seem like Scrum is breaking down all sorts of traditional barriers in these organizations, almost like it's changing the culture itself.
It really is.
So let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, all right, I'm sold. How do I actually do Scrum?
Well, first and foremost, it's about education, right? Make sure everyone on the team understands those core principles
Right.
and commits to embracing them. There are tons of resources available online. Certifications like the CSM or PSM
Okay.
are a good starting point.
And I'm sensing a theme here. It all comes back to teamwork, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Scrum is a team sport through and through. Requires open communication, trust, and just a willingness to learn from each other.
Okay, so we've got education, teamwork. What else should someone keep in mind when taking the Scrum plunge?
Don't be afraid to start small. You know, you don't have to overhaul your entire organization overnight. Maybe try implementing Scrum principles within a single project or team just to get a feel for how it works.
That's a great point. And don't underestimate the power of community either.
Right.
The articles mentioned a bunch of online forums and local meetups where people can connect with other Scrum practitioners, share experiences, get support.
Yeah. It's like having a built-in support group
Right.
for your Scrum journey. Right.
Right.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Learn from others who've already been through the trenches.
So we've covered the good, the bad, the ugly of Scrum implementation. But there's one aspect we haven't really touched on yet.
And what's that?
The human element. Like we've talked about roles and events and processes.
Right.
But what about the people involved? How does Scrum impact their motivation, their sense of ownership, their overall experience of work?
That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
And one that's often overlooked in the rush to implement all the technical aspects of it.
We've talked about Scrum like as this framework for, efficiency, for delivering value, all that.
Right.
But this stack of articles also dives into the psychology behind why it works.
Right.
How it taps into our natural motivations as human beings, right? It's not just a productivity hack.
Yeah.
It's almost like a life hack.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. One article I found really fascinating talked about how Scrum's emphasis on self-organizing teams actually makes people more engaged and productive.
Right.
Because when you feel that sense of ownership over your work, when you have that autonomy to figure out the how, instead of just being told what to do, it can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah. It's like that classic teach a man to fish.
Exactly.
Like give someone a process they control.
Yeah.
And they're going to be more invested in the outcome.
Exactly. Yeah. And Scrum takes it a step further by building in those regular feedback loops. Think about the sprint review.
Okay.
Not only are you demonstrating your work, you're also getting valuable input from stakeholders. Right. It's just this recipe for continuous learning and growth.
And that kind of ties into another psychological aspect I noticed, which is the way Scrum breaks down these large, potentially overwhelming projects into these bite-sized sprints. There's something really satisfying about hitting those short-term goals.
Absolutely. Our brains are wired to seek out rewards, and achieving those sprint goals triggers that dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
Keeps us motivated and engaged. It's like the runner's high you get after completing a mile, but multiplied across an entire team.
Okay. So we're feeling empowered. We're hitting those mini milestones.
Yeah.
But one article mentioned something I found really surprising, which was that Scrum can actually reduce stress and burnout. How does that work? In a world where everything just seems to be moving faster and faster.
It seems counterintuitive, but when you think about it, Scrum actually creates a lot of psychological safety.
Right.
The daily stand-ups, the sprint retrospectives, they provide that space for open communication, for raising concerns, for knowing that your teammates have your back.
So it's not just about the work itself. It's about creating this supportive environment where people feel comfortable asking for help, admitting mistakes, learning from each other.
Exactly. And that sense of psychological safety allows people to take risks, to experiment, to be more creative without that fear of failure. It's a breeding ground for innovation.
So Scrum isn't just about like churning out widgets faster. It's actually changing the way we work together, the way we think about problems, the way we approach our careers.
Yeah.
Even that's pretty profound when you think about it.
It really is. And it all circles back to that core principle of agile, right?
Okay.
Valuing individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
Yeah.
Scrum is just a framework, but when it's used effectively,
it
can unlock this incredible human potential.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Scrum, what's the key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
I think, remember, it's not about blindly following a set of rules. It's about understanding those principles behind Scrum, the why behind the what, and adapting it to create a work environment that is both productive and fulfilling.
It's about empowering teams, fostering collaboration, and ultimately creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and inspired to do their best work. It's about making work well, work better.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.